Exactly. So that's a good point that even people who use the Gini coefficient and talk about it, they'll even say, but actually this isn't a good measure of overall inequality in a country. There's so many nuances. In fact, there's taxes, right? It really matters if you're looking at their income inequality before tax or after tax. So I would just like to tell you what it is, because we were talking about UBI, we were talking about other sort of issues of inequality that you might try to have a more progressive tax system. Well, how does the United States inequality compare to other countries, and how has it been changing over time? These are just some facts I would like to. I think I'm leaning towards having the quiz at the end of the class today. Sorry, so I see people going both ways. There was no consensus, I will say this, among the chat. So I think let me just say a little bit about inequality that I wish I had said previous weeks or previous lecture and I didn't, and then we can kind of go on. So here is a PowerPoint which talks about the Gini coefficient. I think I'm sharing it now, and I'll try to explain it based on this graph here. This graph in the on the right side of the screen has a pink like lens and a blue what's left over. And the Gini coefficient is obtained, you can think of it by this graph, but I should have to explain what the graph is. On the x-axis is the cumulative portion of the population. So at let's say 0.2, that's saying we're going to rank everybody according to their income from bottom to top. So this is the first 20% of people, the bottom 20% of income earners. That's what this 0.2 represents. 0.4 represents the bottom 40% of income. 0.6 is the cumulative bottom 60%. That's what's on the x-axis. On the y-axis is the cumulative proportion of income, meaning of all the income generated in the country, how much of it is earned by the bottom 20%. That is what is written here on the y-axis. So this, I don't know what this dot is here. It looks like it's about 5%. So if this example were correct, it would say the bottom 20% of income earners earn 5% of the income in this country. I think you guys can probably guess in the United States it's worse than that, meaning that they actually earn less than 5% of income, I believe. Okay, so and then you do that for the whole population. The bottom, how well does bottom 10%, bottom 20, bottom 30, bottom 40, bottom 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. And then, of course, when you get to the 100% of the population earns, of course, they earn 100% of the income. So there's two spots on this graph where you know the red line and the green line meet. The red line and the green line have to meet at 0, and then it has to meet at 100 or 1.0. But in between, there's going to be this curve here. It sort of dips down below the 45-degree line. And that is how the Gini coefficient is determined. It's the area of the red lens divided by the area of the whole blue triangle. So what does this mean? Let's say there's 0 area in the red lens. That would mean this red line and this green line are completely overlapping. That means there's perfect equality. Every single person in the country is earning the same income. So that's a Gini coefficient of 0. 0 means everybody's earning the same income, and this red line and the green line are completely overlapped. What about a Gini coefficient of 1? That would mean the red line stays all the way down here at 0, all the way down here at 0, until you get to the very last pixel of this graph where the richest person has all of the money. So these are two extreme cases. Gini coefficient of 1, perfect inequality. Now I wouldn't say perfect, but I mean extreme inequality. And Gini coefficient of 0 is perfect equality. The truth is, you could never get anywhere close to 0 or 1. Gini coefficients are usually around 0.3, 0.4, 0.5. Anything outside 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, I would say is considered extreme in either direction. And that's because you can never get towards either extreme, either 0 or 1. And you might actually see the Gini index equals 100 times the Gini coefficient. You might see that. Okay, do you guys have any questions about what the Gini coefficient is? It's a number between 0 and 1. And the higher your number, the more unequal your country. Got it? So my question is, what do you think is happening in the US? Is our Gini coefficient over time, over the past 100 years, has it been going up or down? Any guesses? Up. Robert says up. He's the only one willing to hazard a guess. I think you're right, Robert. Overall, it has been going up. It doesn't go up every year. Every time that it's measured, it doesn't always go up. There are things like the Great Recession. That actually made us more equal as a country. Isn't that weird? Because some of the richest Americans had their portfolios shrunk because of the stock market shrinking, and they're, people who get a lot of income from capital gains all of a sudden stopped getting capital gains because the Great Recession. So it doesn't go up. Of course, it doesn't go up every year, but that's not what I asked. I asked about the trend, and Robert's answer is correct. It is going up. So the United States is getting generally more unequal in terms of, this is really just income inequality right now. Can I ask, what do you think about wealth inequality? Are we more unequal in wealth or in income? Let me ask that. Is the US, of course, yes, Colin got it. Way more, and I actually like the fact that you said way, because it is not even close. And if you think about it, that makes sense. Wealth is the accumulation of all of your assets over time. So if you start off with some inequality in wealth, and then you have this further income inequality that the richer people are probably going to get even richer, then wealth inequality is like compounding that inequality. It's like inequality squared. Yes. Oh, wait a second, Kevin. Let me correct you there. Capital gains, I believe, is still counted as income. So when you look at this Gini coefficient and you measure income, it's not just earned income in terms of wages or salaries. It includes capital gains, I think. Someone can correct me on that. But for example, when you file your taxes, you have to report all your income, the stuff you get from wages or salaries and capital gains. Of course, capital gains are taxed at a much lower rate currently than wages. At least I'm not a tax expert, but that's what I believe. Okay, but now that we have this thing called the Gini coefficient, we can look at some more data and try to figure out what's happening now. So, okay, so this graph is old. I apologize, but it does say something about there was a time in our past where we were extremely unequal as well. And maybe you've heard of this sort of era of unfettered capitalism and the sort of robber barons who got extremely wealthy, the Carnegies, what other families had accumulated enormous amounts of wealth, and that was sort of really high back then. With this decrease in inequality, that actually came from the emergence of the middle class. I don't want to give a history lesson or anything, but after World War II, United States was like the only industrialized country who hadn't been destroyed by the war, and the production just exploded. And anybody who wanted to get a good job in a factory could do it, and the wages were good, and that's why you saw this reduction in inequality. It's not because the rich people gave away all their money, it's because the middle class, a really strong middle class emerged. So let's kind of just ignore what happened in the 20s and 30s, and then and then the post-World War II economic expansion. Let's ignore that. I think perhaps what's interesting for us is what has happened since 1970. Since 1970, there has been this increase in the Gini index. Gini index is just the Gini coefficient times 100. So when you see this, it's like 0.46 approximately. It's been going up. And I'm sorry I haven't updated this in like 10 years. I should do that. I'm sure there's a more updated graph somewhere online. However, then the question is why? I don't want to spend too much time on this. I told you I was going to give you guys time to do the quiz. So here's one answer to why. Starting in about the 1970s and 80s, there's been this split between the productivity of our country, how well our businesses are doing, and how much money the median family income is getting. It turns out it's gotten pretty flat. Economists are all aware of this. Something happened towards the end of the 70s that caused a split. It used to be that productivity and income were really closely tied. All the benefits of the new technologies were shared with the workers, the labor of those technologies. And then something happened in the 80s where it stopped being true. And still it's not true. This blue line, it keeps going up, and this light blue line is pretty flat. And so that's the economic story of income inequality. It's that globalization really took off in the 1970s. And it has benefited us in a lot of ways. Our products got cheaper. We have the stuff that we buy is now less expensive because of globalization. But it encourages this winner-take-all profits from industry. At least, I'm giving you now the case of some economists who try to explain income inequality. Why has it grown so much since the 70s? It really has to do, they believe, with the fact that certain industries are winner-take-all. Financial markets have this, the biggest bank just dominates all the other ones because they can leverage themselves and take a tiny little profit and expand it to make a huge profit. Paul Krugman is an economist. He's a pretty liberal guy, so just take that with a grain of salt. What did Paul Krugman say? There were soaring incomes that were achieved by cutting wages, crushing unions, and financial wheeling and dealing. It almost sounds like he's anti-business with this quote, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about the causes of the increase in income inequality. At least this is what some people say. If you're a really conservative economist, you probably wouldn't disagree that globalization increases income inequality. Rather, what you would say is that's not a bad thing. It doesn't matter if there's income inequality. What matters is how prosperous is the country? How much do we produce and consume? And globalization isn't a bad thing. So what if we can have our factories exported to Indonesia or Bangladesh and try to keep good paying jobs here at home, then we all benefit. And so when we talk about immigration, we're talking about whether anyone should be allowed into this country and get a job here. Yeah, we should think about that. We should think about income inequality and globalization and really labor markets. What happens to labor markets? Paul Krugman's quote was saying something about unions too. That labor used to be organized in the 1950s, 1960s, and somewhat into the 70s. Labor was organized in such a way that it could guarantee it would generate the returns from their productivity. But as the unions are failing, partially because of globalization, if you're a union here in the United States and a company saying, well, we're not going to give you a raise, and the union says, oh yeah, well, we're going to go on strike, and the company says, okay, go ahead, we'll just move our factory to Mexico. That has caused the wages not to increase at the same rate as the productivity, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinions. Okay, I don't want to take too much time. I think that's good for now. We will segue that into next week's stuff about the labor markets and globalization, etc. I'm gonna end this. Oh no, I'm gonna stop.